The marble floors of the massive corporate headquarters reflected the bright ceiling lights as employees hurried through the lobby without noticing Daniel Reyes pushing his cleaning cart quietly from one hallway to another. Every morning before sunrise, he arrived wearing the same faded gray janitor uniform, headphones tucked beneath his hood while language lessons played softly in his ears. To everyone else, he was invisible. Just another worker wiping glass doors and emptying trash cans before executives arrived. But Daniel carried an extraordinary secret beneath his exhausted appearance. After finishing long overnight shifts, he returned to a tiny apartment where his 7-year-old daughter Sophia waited for him. Since losing his wife 3 years earlier, Daniel had raised Sophia alone while balancing multiple jobs and teaching himself languages during sleepless nights. Books borrowed from libraries filled their shelves, covered with handwritten notes in Spanish, French, Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, Japanese, German, and Italian. One stormy afternoon, tension exploded inside the company's executive conference room. CEO Victor Langston had just arrived after a disastrous international meeting involving powerful Japanese investors threatening to cancel a billion-dollar partnership because of serious translation mistakes. Executives argued nervously while assistants rushed around in panic. Daniel quietly entered the room to collect overflowing trash bins. Suddenly, angry Japanese voices burst through the speakerphone. The entire room froze in confusion. Then Daniel answered calmly in flawless Japanese. Silence swallowed the conference room. Executives stared in disbelief as the janitor spoke confidently, apologizing for the misunderstanding and carefully rebuilding the damaged negotiation. Within minutes, the furious investor's tone softened completely. When the call ended, Victor slowly turned toward him. "How many languages do you speak?" Daniel sat stiffly in the leather chair across from CEO Victor Langston's enormous desk, feeling painfully out of place in his janitor uniform. Through the glass office walls, he could see executives whispering and staring at him with confusion. Only an hour earlier, he had been mopping floors. Now he was sitting inside the most powerful office in the building after saving a billion-dollar international deal. Victor studied him carefully, still struggling to understand what had just happened in the conference room. "Where did you learn Japanese?" the CEO asked. Daniel clasped his hands nervously. "Mostly online courses, books, and language exchange forums." Victor raised an eyebrow. "And the other languages?" Daniel quietly listed all 9. For several seconds, the room remained silent except for the rain tapping against the windows. Victor leaned back slowly, disbelief written across his face. "You speak better than half my international department," he muttered. Daniel gave a small shrug. "Languages were always easy for me." "Then why are you cleaning offices at midnight?" The question hit harder than Daniel expected. After a pause, he explained everything: his wife's illness, the medical debt, leaving university to raise Sophia alone, and taking any job he could find to survive. Still, every night after work, he studied for hours because learning languages made him feel hopeful again. Victor listened quietly, his expression changing from curiosity to respect. Finally, the CEO stood and walked toward the window overlooking the city skyline. "You know," Victor said softly, "most people in this company would have ignored your talent forever." He turned back toward Daniel with a firm look. "I'm not going to make that mistake." That evening, Daniel climbed the narrow stairs to his apartment carrying a small grocery bag and a chocolate cake balanced carefully in one hand. Sophia opened the door before he could knock, instantly noticing the unusual smile on his face. Most nights he returned home exhausted and quiet, but tonight his eyes held something she had not seen in years: hope. "What happened?" she asked excitedly. Daniel set the groceries down and knelt beside her. "Something unbelievable." As rain tapped softly against the apartment windows, he told her everything about the conference room, the Japanese investors, and the CEO offering him a position in the international communications department. Sophia listened with wide eyes, barely blinking. "You mean, you won't be cleaning floors anymore?" she whispered. "Maybe not," Daniel replied, almost afraid to believe it himself. Sophia suddenly wrapped her arms around his neck tightly. I knew you were special, Papa. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, fighting back emotion. For years, he had hidden his struggles behind tired smiles, pretending everything would somehow work out. Every sleepless night spent studying languages after exhausting shifts suddenly felt meaningful. The next morning, Daniel stood nervously in front of a mirror adjusting his first real business suit, one the company had purchased for him. Sophia fixed his tie carefully while grinning proudly. You look like a movie star, she teased. When Daniel arrived at headquarters, employees stared openly as he stepped onto the executive floor. Some whispered in disbelief, while others looked annoyed that a janitor had suddenly become part of corporate leadership. But Daniel ignored the stares. For the first time in years, he walked through those halls believing he finally belonged somewhere. Not everyone inside the company welcomed Daniel's sudden rise. While international clients praised his intelligence and professionalism, several senior executives secretly resented seeing a former janitor sitting in important meetings beside the CEO. Among them, Richard Coleman hated Daniel the most. As head of global operations, Richard believed positions of power belonged to people with elite backgrounds, not someone who once pushed a mop through the hallways. He got lucky once, Richard muttered repeatedly during meetings. That doesn't make him executive material. But Daniel continued proving himself. He solved communication problems with foreign investors, rebuilt damaged partnerships, and helped the company secure major international contracts worth millions. The more Daniel succeeded, the more bitter Richard became. Then disaster suddenly struck. Confidential company files involving overseas investments were leaked online, causing panic across the corporation. Stock prices dropped within hours while reporters flooded the building with questions. Emergency meetings lasted late into the night as executives desperately searched for someone to blame. Richard seized the opportunity immediately. Daniel had access to international communications, he announced coldly during a tense board meeting. How do we know he didn't leak the files? The room fell silent. Several executives exchanged suspicious looks toward Daniel, their trust disappearing almost instantly. Despite all his accomplishments, many still saw him as the janitor from downstairs. Victor Langston looked directly at Daniel. Did you do this? Daniel met his eyes calmly. No, sir. Without hesitation, Victor replied. I believe him. Richard slammed his hand against the table angrily. Based on what? Victor's voice turned sharp. Because integrity matters more than job titles. Determined to clear his name, Daniel worked nonstop tracing hidden messages buried inside foreign emails. Months passed after Richard's disgraceful removal, and the company entered its most successful year in history. International partnerships expanded across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, largely because of Daniel's remarkable communication skills and cultural understanding. Investors trusted him instantly, employees respected him deeply, and for the first time in decades, the company's atmosphere began changing for the better. Yet despite his growing success, Daniel never forgot where he came from. He still arrived early, stayed late, and spent most evenings helping Sophia with homework at their small apartment. Instead of buying expensive watches or luxury cars, he quietly paid off old debts and saved money for Sophia's future education. One evening, Victor Langston unexpectedly visited Daniel's home for dinner. The CEO stood silently inside the modest apartment, surprised by how simple everything was. The furniture was old but clean, family photos covered the walls, and Sophia laughed happily while Daniel cooked pasta in the tiny kitchen. There was warmth inside the apartment, a kind Victor had not felt in years. During dinner, Sophia proudly showed Victor her school drawings while Daniel translated French phrases for her between bites of food. Watching them together stirred something painful inside the CEO. Years earlier, Victor had sacrificed his relationship with his own son while chasing business success. Now that relationship barely existed. Before leaving, Sophia handed Victor a folded drawing. It showed Daniel standing beside the CEO under bright sunshine with the words, "Thank you for believing in my dad." Victor stared at the picture for a long moment. The following week, he stood before the board of directors and announced a shocking decision. "I am appointing Daniel Reyes as Vice President of International Relations." Gasps filled the room instantly. Victor looked proudly toward Daniel. "Talent," he declared firmly, "can come from anywhere." 1 year later, Daniel stood confidently on a massive stage inside the company auditorium while hundreds of employees filled the seats before him. Giant screens displayed the company's international achievements, but Daniel barely mentioned profits or business growth. Instead, he spoke about struggle, sacrifice, and the importance of seeing value in people others often ignore. "I used to clean these floors alone at midnight," he said calmly. "Most people walked past me without ever learning my name." The room remained completely silent. Daniel described studying languages during lunch breaks, falling asleep over borrowed books, and returning home exhausted while trying to give Sophia a better future. He spoke honestly about grief after losing his wife, and the fear of raising a child alone with almost no money. Yet through everything, he refused to stop learning. "There are extraordinary people hidden in ordinary places," he continued. "Never underestimate someone because of their position." Victor Langston watched proudly from the front row. Under Daniel's influence, the company had transformed. Scholarships were created for employees' children, janitors and cafeteria workers received better wages, and educational programs helped workers develop new skills regardless of their background. After the speech ended, thunderous applause echoed through the auditorium as employees rose to their feet. Later that evening, Daniel walked outside holding Sophia's hand while reporters surrounded them with flashing cameras and shouted questions in different languages. Daniel answered each one effortlessly, making Sophia beam with pride. Near the company entrance, Victor approached and handed Daniel a sealed envelope. Inside was the deed to a beautiful new home. Daniel looked up speechlessly. Victor smiled warmly. "Every great father deserves a fresh start." Tears filled Daniel's eyes as Sophia hugged him tightly beneath the glowing city lights.